Can you tell me, where are we sitting at all?
We're in McCarthy's bar in Fethard in County Tipperary, but it's not only a pub, it's also a restaurant, and we're still Undertakers. And once upon a time it was a hotel, and we had horses, we had a mart. It was a pretty big business.
And when did your family become involved in the undertaking business?
Around the mid-19th century. And it's a pub undertaker, so pub undertakers kind of came into being after the British brought in a law in 1847. So it was just after the famine, and there were an awful lot of bodies around, and the British couldn't cope. So they brought in a law in 1847 that obliged publicans to take bodies in, and as publicans had a cellar, or they had a place to store them, they took them in, and a lot of them, as a result, became undertakers. And I think it's 2024 now. I think there's still between 70 and 80 publican undertakers left in the country.
Are there many left in Tipperary?
Me, and I don't know who else. I'm trying to think. Ryan's up in Nina were another one, and there's a few around. Yeah, there's certain areas. There's few and far between now, but they were more common. I can't, off the top of my head, I can't think of any others.
And when did you get involved yourself?
I got involved when I was about 13 in the undertaking side of things. I was in the pub here when I was about 10. And it's a family business, so I came down, like, I'm the 5th generation in the business. So naturally, you graduated, you started off washing glasses at the age of 10. And then at the age of 13, because my mother was the undertaker and we had a driver, but there was no one to help him. So unfortunately at the time I wanted to be a rock star, so I played the drums, so it was the easiest one to find, and they just stuck their head out and he's in that room, found me, get into the hearse. So I basically at the age of 13 I started going out collecting bodies with the hearse driver.
And your mother was the undertaker?
My mother was the undertaker, yeah. She took over from her aunt, my grandaunt Beattie, and Beattie had taken over from her brother, but he died fairly young. So he had taken over actually from his mother, my great grandmother. The two men, the original man Michael lived a good while, then his son Richard died young, so he died in his early 50s, and his wife Mary took over, so she was the undertaker for a long time. Then her son Jack, my granduncle, was there for a number of years. After that Beattie, then Annette, my mum, and then I took over from her. But I didn't intend taking over. You know, my dreams of being a rock star were just lack of talent ruined that. And so when I came back, when I finished college, I kind of drifted back, and I was kind of needed here. I was very busy at the time, so I more or less drifted into it.
It must have been unusual for your mother and the other women to be undertakers back that time of Ireland.
Well, it was at the time. It wasn't very common. Like I do remember when my mum was the undertaker, say in the 80s, there were only 3 female undertakers in the country, and there's a lot more now. Like I meet them all over the country at the moment. But yeah, it was unusual then. But it was kind of accepted here in town. It was, I suppose, because Beattie, my grandaunt, had been the undertaker before, and her mother had been the undertaker. Nobody thought anything of it really.
And did those women do the laying out back then at all?
Mum did the laying out, yeah, definitely. Beattie, I don't think so. But you see, her sister was a nurse, well, she was the district nurse, so she would have done a lot of laying out. And as for my great grandmother, I don't know, but there would have been a lot of staff here, and in every town there was always somebody who would lay out a corpse. So even like when I started, there was a woman who used to do it with first my mum and then with me. So you know, it just followed on. You were trained in, and but that's changed now. There's not so much laying out being done because the embalmers have come in, and that's changed the whole thing completely.
And when did the embalmers come?
Really around the 1990s. That's when that started. Late 80s, 1990s. Certainly around here anyway. The first embalmer came in. And to be honest, I embraced them because the old method of laying out a body was very risky. You were left with potential leaks and potential smells and gases. And like I remember doing funerals when I was young, a young teenager, and you were only waiting for the time you could put the lid on the coffin and get it closed because things were happening that you didn't want to happen.
Did you just make your own coffins here?
We did. Yeah, the coffins were made down in the Hearse House. I'll show you that later on. But yeah, there was 2 men here who used to make the coffins. Now, since my time, there hasn't been coffins. I'd say the 60s, come 70s were the last time they made them here.
And did you ever remember them talking about painting it with pitch black?
I remember the pitch. Yeah, I remember Bob pitch in the back at the bottom of the coffin. Like we would have got coffins in at that time unlined, and then they'd pitch them down the back. So there's a pitch that came up maybe 2-3 inches on the bottom of them. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, they painted. It came up 2 on the side, 2 inches on the side. But it's really funny because the lads at the crematorium were telling me that occasionally a coffin will arrive in that's been pitched still. This is in 2024. Now, I don't know if they're old stock or if it's just somebody who's making them and is still pitching them. Like most of them now are lined with plastic. But the pitch still turns up from time to time because I know I had a coffin, an old coffin that I used for the crematorium one day. And basically the family said, we don't have any money. I said, right, there's an old coffin somewhere. And the lads told me that they checked for pitch, and they had checked, and I never checked it. But they said, no, you're okay, it wasn't pitched.
And did you ever remember different colour linings on the coffin for a male or for a female?
Well, not so much the different linings, but what they did have was different coloured habits. Most of the linings that we got in now would be white. I know there were different ones, and I've seen different. There's it's kind of almost a pink, and there's a blue for the male female. Yeah, but we always got all ours done in white. But yeah, there were different coloured habits. There was either blue or white, and they had this picture on the front of them. I don't know if you've ever seen one, but for males you had a picture of Jesus, and for the females you had a picture of Mary. Horrible things, absolutely horrible things, but they were, from an Undertaker's point of view, they were really simple because they slipped over the arms and they were open at the back, so you just slipped them around the neck, tied them, and that was it, and everyone wore them. So like when I would have been going into the mortuary, like nobody had funeral homes when I started, say in the early 80s, so we'd collect from the mortuary in either Cashel or Clonmel. Even home wakes weren't that popular. And literally you go in, put the person into the coffin and slip this thing onto them. Took you about 30 seconds. Now, we dress everybody in their own clothes, and that whole tradition has changed, which is for the better actually. It's much nicer.
And they were the habits. Did you ever come across the habits from the Friars?
Yeah. I think we only used 1 or 2, but I was talking to another Undertaker a few years ago, and he had a box of them, and he gave me a few. So there were the old brown ones, brown habits, dreadful yolks. And funny enough, it was sometimes when you're digging a grave, somebody might have gone in there 60, 70, 80 years ago. You'll often find the remnants of the habits in the grave. The gravedigger will call you over and say, look what I found here. And the body must be gone, but a bit of the habit could still be there, or the lining of the coffin.
You ever hear the saying, there's no pockets in it?
In a shroud. And there's that. Though some cultures have, some cultures do send money off in the coffin. Some Chinese cultures do. They actually put money in. Now I don't know if it's real money or if it's if they make it, but they send it off with the body in the coffin.
Do you see that here or no?
I've never seen that. I've never done a Chinese funeral, so and I've never seen. I have actually put a few items in the coffins that people wanted to get rid of. One was there was a bit of a dispute in the family over a medal, and 3 or 4 different people wanted this particular medal. So one of the family came to me and said, listen, there's going to be an awful row about this. Put it into Dad's hand when we were sending them off. So I just put the medal into his hand, closed the lid, end of row. So it was an all-Ireland medal, so there was going to be a big row over it.
And did you ever see people putting in little ornaments or little other mementos, kind of like for kind of almost like little comforting things for the next life?
Oh yeah, that happens all the time. You'd often have people going off with teddies. They could have some memento of something that was precious to them during their life. It could be a blanket, it could be a jacket, it could be anything. I do remember one fella. They sent him off with a few videotapes, and I know what he used to watch on those videotapes too, but I'm not going to go any further on that one. And then we have to be really careful now because cremations come in, and once upon a time it didn't really matter. Well, if they're going to be buried, it doesn't matter. If they want to put in mementos, that's fine. But you have to be really, really careful when you go to the crematorium, because I don't know if you've ever seen the form that you fill in to bring a body to the crematorium, but they ask about certain things that could be in the body, like a pacemaker can explode and destroy the chamber. There are what they call them imperial nails, they can explode, and there's different body parts, replacement body parts that can explode. So you have to do a check for them. So normally the embalmer will check for stuff like that and take it out. But then some people put, Mammy loved her hair, and they throw a can of hairspray in. That's a bomb. So you have to be really careful and go through stuff and make sure that they don't put things like that in there.
Did you ever see kind of unusual little practices in different parts of Tipperary, here in Fethard or other villages, at the grave, or people might cross the shovels or might do something different in a graveyard?
Yeah, the traditions here are a little bit different in that we've always had gravediggers. So, they just literally, they open and close the grave, and there's no great traditions. I have seen one now, but it wasn't a funeral I did here. I did it up in Connemara, and it was actually lovely. It was near enough to Mahon Cross, but where the neighbours all dug the grave, but then they lined it with moss. So the grave was just green the whole way. And then when the funeral was over, they filled in the grave, and then they built everything up, they put all the flowers in, and they put netting over the grave. And everything was finished before we left the cemetery. But around here it's not that common. The families don't normally fill in the graves, but literally you go 5 miles up the road, 6 miles up the road, you're heading towards North Tip, and in some places there is no gravedigger. It's family and friends do the graves, and there'd be a stronger tradition then of drink at the gravesite, where the family bring out maybe a bottle of whiskey or a crate of stout or whatever. That still exists, but not so much here.
And who would the drink be for?
The drink would be for the people who dug the grave. So it would normally be family and friends. So you could have 5, 10, 15, 20 men digging a grave, and it takes the work out of it, where they all just take a few shovels each. Fellow will dig for 10 minutes, next a fresh fellow will come in, while they're waiting could have a bottle of beer or whiskey. There was a good story actually. There was a gravedigger close enough to here, and himself and his son, and the son was an awful alcoholic, and so the gravedigger, they told the family said, we'll bring a few drinks down, and the gravedigger said, don't, because your man will drink them. So he said, just don't bring drink down. Of course they brought down a crate of stout and a bottle of whiskey, and the older gravedigger left his son to start digging, and he came back about 3 hours later. Anyway, the son was unconscious beside the grave, 6 bottles and half the bottle of whiskey gone. So he said, I'll teach this one a lesson. He rolled him into the grave, and he put a sheet of galvanise over it. He went back about 3 hours later. She never woke up. He was still asleep inside the grave. He said, pointless. So yeah, you'd hear a few stories like that, all right.
And come here to did you ever hear of them? You said in Clonmel you saw it. Did you ever see that being done in Tipperary, where the family would fill in the graves with the shovels there and then, and the family would still be there?
Yeah, I've seen it, and some people like it, other people don't. Actually, it's funny because there's one tradition, where they put the purple bag full of hay or straw on top of the coffin. We haven't used that for about 40 years, because in a lot of places they throw the first handful of soil in on top of the coffin, and the whole reason for that was to take the hollow sound out of the first clatter of stuff going in. But we've always laid a green mat over the coffin, and we put the flowers on top of that. So they generally, unless the family requests, they generally don't start to fill in until everybody's gone out of the cemetery. But I know that's different in different places.
But that cushion that you're on about, that was there basically to take the clout off the sods as they hit the wood.
Yeah. It took you didn't have that that hollow sound and hollow feeling, which would often upset people. So, but because we don't actually fill in till they're gone, generally we don't use it.
Do you ever come across people asking you, just at the moment the coffin will be lowered into the ground, to open up the fasteners on the coffin to even be a bit looser?
Never. No. Though some people will, when they give the final twist, will maybe twist back one, just to leave it loose. But that'll be done. I've seen that done in the funeral home or in a house, but never at the gravesite.
So done in the funeral home? In
the funeral home or in the house, and they might just twist back one and just say, we'll give Daddy a chance. Daddy isn't coming back, but like it's just something that's in their own mind.
And tell me this, do you remember many funerals in the homes years ago, before the funeral homes were?
No. My mum now told me about it, a good few. But no, the home wakes were kind of gone from this area. The majority of the wakes that we had were in the mortuaries and the hospitals. So like when I remember starting when I was kind of 13, and we would pick somebody up at the house and bring them to the hospital mortuary. So they were laid out there. So I can remember the very first one I did. I remember it's a house out the road near where I live now, and we picked up somebody and brought them to Cashel, and they were waked in Cashel. People came the day of the funeral, the day of the removal to the church, and there was a queue for maybe an hour or 2 hours through the mortuary in Cashel, and then we went on. But I know my mum she told me about a famous wake around this area. Maybe I shouldn't mention, but I'm going to anyway. It was in a castle nearby, and the woman that owned the castle was a wild enough woman, and her friends were wild. So she was put into the coffin in the castle, and her friends started drinking, and they were hard drinkers, this crowd, and they drank and drank and drank, and eventually the drink ran out, and they got whatever money they could get, and they bought more drink, but eventually that ran out too. So they said, where are we going to get money for more drink? And the only thing they could see was the deceased still had her rings on. So they said, should we take off the rings and we'll pawn them, and we'll get some more drink? So they went to take the rings off, and the rings wouldn't come off. So somebody drunk said, sure, listen, she doesn't need the fingers anymore, we'll cut them off. And luckily there was someone sober there. Phone call came through to McCarthy's, Fethard 14. Could you send a net down with the lid now? And they ended the wake, and that was the end. They brought her to was she brought to the church at all? Was she Church of Ireland, or was she a Quaker? I think she was actually buried on the land in the estate. But they finished the wake when they decided to cut the fingers off. So, but you never heard that one before.
And was drink a big thing at the wakes years ago?
Huge, yeah. I've ledgers here now where people come in to organise funerals, and because we had the whole thing under one umbrella, they could get the drink and the food and the pipes and the tobacco. So like I have one funeral I found where they ordered the drink, so they ordered whiskey, stout, port, 5-star port, clay pipes, tobacco, biscuits and cake. And they came in the following day and ordered to have it in a coffin. So they were getting their priorities right. They were kicking the wake off first. So we've got a lot of good entries like that in the books, and entries like a phone call to Dublin. And that was to do the death notice. So the phone call to Dublin cost something like 15 shillings. And all these things are itemized in the book. It's really interesting if you look back on them.
What was the phone call to Dublin?
Irish Independent. Or Irish Press, depending on the politics, to put the death notice in. And I remember that when I was a kid, it was the greatest pain in the backside. because you could be waiting on the phone. You could be sitting in the room for 2-3 hours trying to get through to the newspaper, because all the Undertakers were trying to get through at the time. Nowadays, like, you do it yourself. It's self-published on RIP. But back then, everybody used the newspaper. So you could have 50 Undertakers trying to get through at the same time. And it was an absolute nightmare.
I want to go back to the wakes. You mentioned the pipes.
Mm.
People would pass around these clay pipes a day at the funeral.
Clay pipes and tobacco, yeah. Well, I don't think they passed them around. I think everybody got a clay pipe. They were relatively inexpensive. Like, I've seen them in the book as 100 clay pipes for a funeral. But it was part of the tradition where they'd smoke. And actually, the Catholic Church were pretty much against wakes, because the wakes could get out of hand. So there was a very good historian talking about it one day, and she said, like, literally they were drinking and carousing, and they were out over the back wall. So what was going on at the wake was it was leading to a wedding in some cases.
Do you ever come across any references to snuff at the wakes?
Yeah. There was snuff at the wakes as well. There wasn't an awful lot now in the ledgers for snuff, but I have seen a few entries for snuff. But I'd say now, whatever was going at the time, they brought him into the wake. Well, it's a celebration of the person's life. You know, the whole idea of the wake and the drink and they celebrate the life of the person. And, you know, a lot of people still try to do that in more forms than one, more than the wake. Like, another thing that's changing, like, what you have to remember is the traditions that we have in Ireland regarding funerals are Victorian. And, you know, we're only starting to break the mould now. Whereas, you know, dressing in black, the black horses, the black horse-drawn hearse, the black, everything's black, that's starting to go. But after kind of 200 years. So now people are saying, you know, don't wear black, wear bright clothes, or wear a pink ribbon, or wear a yellow ribbon, or a flowery shirt. That's starting to come in, and religion to a certain extent is starting to go out of some funerals. So I've got a lot more now where I might go from a home or a nursing home directly to the crematorium with no service, no mass. So that the whole thing is changing. It's just the way Irish society is changing. So different traditions and customs are starting now.
And do you remember, probably maybe in your mother's time, when your people wearing black for the year?
Not so much around here, no. I've only seen it once or twice, but wearing black for the year wasn't a big thing here. And I don't know why. I don't know, is it because we were a garrison town and a lot of the customs were probably English?
Do you ever see people wearing a black diamond on their arm years ago? Or?
No, you're the first person I ever even heard mention that. Those traditions were never really around here. Now, I must ask my mum, she might. But like, I've been involved in the funerals since the early 80s, and I've never seen any of those traditions.
Yeah, the black diamond disappeared in the 70s. It was done in Wexford, but two Undertakers in town used to never heard of it, and the man this morning had it.
Really?
It's funny, it's gas, isn't it? Isn't it really funny?
Yeah.
That's the way traditions go. Sometimes you see them, sometimes you don't see them, yeah?
Yeah, it depends. And you see, you could have, what you're saying there, you could have an Undertaker who does a particular area. So, say you're talking about Clonmel, he might do the Nair Valley, and that tradition could be still alive in the Nair Valley, whereas it wouldn't be inside in the town. You know, that's... and he would be the main one to do the funerals in that area. So the...
And come here to me, back to the wakes, eh? Do you see much of a kind of a resurgence in wakes at home?
Oh yeah. And more of the funerals are going back home. I'd say probably 80% of funerals now are going back to the house. And there's a new thing after coming in the last maybe 5 to 10 years where they bring the person home, they have a wake at home for themselves. The following day they bring them into the funeral home and they have a public wake, and that night, rather than going to the church, they bring the person back home again. I had one of those yesterday where we brought him home, brought him to the funeral part of the wake, brought him back home again, and then we came to the church yesterday morning. So that's getting bigger and bigger. And then some people just keep them at home and they have the wake at home. And that's becoming quite big as well. And it's actually nice. It's a nice tradition. But it's going, like everything went to the funeral parlour at one stage. Now it's starting to go back again.
And when did your funeral parlour open?
Around the mid-80s, around 1985 or so. And before that, as I said, it was all in the hospitals. But only in the last maybe 10, 15 years, more and more people are bringing the people home, and they want to have them at home. And some people have them at home in a coffin, other people have them at home and put them into the bed. You know, depends on what family you're going back to.
And did you ever see any? I've often heard from people talking about houses where years ago, when the houses were smaller, you'd have to take a door out or a window out to get the coffin out.
Oh yeah, I can remember that. I've actually I've had to help take windows out of houses to get them out, or get them in. But yeah, some of the places now you'd have to stand the coffin to get them in. So what, that they could be so tight that you literally have, with the person inside, you'd have to stand it up. Now it depends where you are on the side of the street. That's how you do it, or the old way you took the window out. But like, I've taken people in and out of places on sheets, and there'd be a gang of people there, and you'd literally lift them around corners on sheets because there's no way you get a coffin or even the stretcher in. That's another new thing as well. We have removal vehicles now, which we wouldn't have had 20 years ago. Most Undertakers now have, it's just an estate car, or it looks like an estate car, but the back of it is converted into a hearse. So if I'm going into most places now to remove somebody, I have a stretcher, so I can actually operate it by myself, but it's much easier and much safer rather than trying to get a coffin into a house or up a stairs or whatever. So that's a new thing that's come in, and you'll find most Undertakers have one of those now. They call them a hearse, but it's great because it's discreet as well. I've had families who have said, listen, we don't particularly want anyone to know that he's dead yet. Could you bring the hearse? So you go up in the hearse, it just looks like an estate car. You bring the person out in the stretcher, take them off to the mortuary. You can even get them back, and they could be back, embalmed, everything, before anybody finds out. So it gives the family a bit of time, a bit of private time. Because once the word gets out, the funeral is off, people start ringing, people start calling. So that's kind of a new thing that's started.
And in your mother, in time years ago, did you ever remember the horse-drawn hearses?
We had the horse-drawn hearse here. We had one down in one of the sheds down the back, and it was the old horse-drawn hearse. But I took it to be restored, and I took it to 3 different people, and I think 2 of the 3 were alcoholics, and the sub that I gave them, they drank, and nothing was done. But I eventually took it to a Dutchman down in Killarney, and he rang me one day and he said, listen, that hearse was a home job, it was home built, and he said the timber and the metal in that is completely rotten. He said, I could actually build you a replica cheaper than doing a restoration. So we just left it off. So there's no point. He said, it is actually rotten right through. So I don't remember using the horse-drawn hearse. The first hearse I remember here was a big old, I think it was a Lincoln or a Chevy. There was an awful lot of American imports they were brought in the 50s and 60s. And so most of the Undertakers, when they had their original hearse, was a big American, there was a big bench seat on it, and a curtain to the back. And there was loads of those in Ireland. They were all imported. I think 50s and 60s. And then it wasn't until 1976 or 77 that we got our first hearse built, which is a Ford Granada. But these big American yokes we actually had the second American car down the back for spare parts. And they were steel. They were Detroit specials. And they were all over the country. Because most of the Undertakers around here now would have had one of those. Great jokes. They looked like something out of Greece. I know my uncle was actually meant to take over here, but he went off and he joined the army. But he used to take it out when he was a teenager and go to dances over in Cashel. And he was parking up a laneway, so all anybody could see when they came out was this really impressive looking American front on the car. So he had some girl in there one day anyway, and her elbow hit the blind. There was a blind in the back, and it went up, and she looked in, saw a hearse, went screaming down the street, "I'm about to be murdered!" And he called the police. So he never looked at a hearse again after that. And what he didn't know was he was tax insured, and he had a license that my grandaunt had bought for him, because she knew he was stealing the hearse. And she just went in at the time he didn't have to do a test. So she just bought a license and had it done in case there was ever any trouble. And but I think the girl in Cashel finished all that.
It's not incredible. Then the coach bills, then they were Dundalk or Drogheda, is there a company?
There's more of them now. There's probably 6 or 7 of them around the country. And the hearse I have at the moment, I got built 2 or 3 years ago down in Kerry, outside Killarney, between Killarney and Tralee. Before that, Duffy's up in Dundalk were the main coach builders, and there was a few others around. I think O'Sullivan's and Turner's Cross, and then there's a few up north, Quinn's. So yeah, there's 5 or 6 coach builders out there making them now.
Can I ask you a question as well? Have you seen practices change? Say, for example, the hearse is going down the main street here in Fethard. Will some of the local shops turn off their lights still?
Yeah, that still happens. The majority now, as I make my way from here up to the cemetery, if they know there's a funeral on, they'll close the shop, turn the lights off, put down the shutters. Some will even ring me beforehand to say, listen, just give us a buzz before, as you're coming down the street, and let us know that you're coming. But every single, there's probably about 10 different premises from here until we get out of town, and every single one of them would close down. Like you'd have the pharmacy. If it was a customer, the staff would all stand out the front. Where it's coming next, there's a hairdresser and a florist. They'd always turn off the lights. There's a delicatessen, turn off. The church at the other end of town, there'd be someone waiting there, and they'd ring the bell as we go past. Then the butcher, he'd close down. Yeah, the whole way, the garage, they'd all close for that few seconds that we're going past. That's still very much alive.
And it was oncoming traffic towards you, would they stop?
Generally, 95% of people would stop. Occasionally you'll see something coming fast and you try and flag them down. It's either they're unaware or ignorance, but the majority will stop.
Engine off?
Might not always go engine off. Depends if it's a big truck, they wouldn't, because starting it up again it makes as much of a racket. But no, they generally would stop and make way and let you get past.
Can you tell me about the tradition here of Barrack Street in Fethard?
Barrack Street, I suppose that's an unusual one. Fethard was one of the towns that welcomed Mr. Oliver Cromwell, but we didn't get ravaged basically because they cut a deal with him, and he came in through the gate on Barrack Street, and because of that, they say there's two stories. One is that he fell off the horse on Barrack Street and cursed the street, and the other one is they said because he came off that street, the people of Fethard never wanted to bring a funeral down that street. So as a result, when we get to the square, Barrack Street is the most direct way to the cemetery, but if you turn right and go around the block, that's the way we go, and it's all because of the legend of Oliver Cromwell. To this day, there was one person who said, "I'm not letting that bastard tell me what to do," and the family went straight up the street. But other than that, and occasionally we go up because people live on the street, and there's houses there that were never there before, so they're prepared to put up with the curse of Cromwell. But
have you come across that in any other place in Tipperary?
I've never heard of it anywhere else. No. I've never heard of that anywhere in Ireland, actually. It's fairly unique.
Say when you're bringing someone for burial, do you stop off at people's houses, or is there places that you stop?
Oh yeah. Always if you're passing the house, we'd stop at the person's house, unless there was a request not to. And the request not to generally because the place is falling down and they don't want people looking at it. But no, we'd always stop at the house or stop at something that was significant in the person's life. Just say he was a mechanic and he worked in the garage that you're passing by, we'd stop there. Or my hearse driver now, we stopped at the bookies, Bob, because Bob spent most of his life in the bookies, and if we were looking for him, that's where he was. There's a story going around town that the hearse stalled at the bookies. It was not true. I actually stopped it, but I actually pulled out the old hearse because we were just after replacing it, and it was the one that Bob always drove, so I pulled that out for his funeral. But actually, I had an unusual story with Bob. Bob was our hearse driver for many years, and I went off to Australia in the early 90s, and I used to ring home every week just to see that everything was okay. So I rang home one week anyway, and Mum said, "Would you come home?" And now I still had about a month to go. And I said, "Well, no, I don't want to come home." She said, "Bob is sick, and we don't have anyone to drive the hearse." And I said, "Listen, there's plenty of people there that can drive a hearse." So the following week I rang again, and any chance you come home? I said no, because I knew if I came home, nobody was going to compensate me for my holidays, and I'd never get them back again, and I still was going to Southeast Asia, so I didn't want to miss that. So eventually I kept going anyway, and every time I rang home I got this plea, so I stopped ringing home, and I got home, and Bob had been sick, had been in hospital. So about 3 or 4 days after I got back, we got a funeral, and Bob took the hearse out from down below, brought it around to the funeral home, and I went over and sat in beside him. I said, "Bob, I heard you were sick while I was gone." And he says, "I was. He says, "Actually, I died." I said, "You what?" "I died while you were away." "What do you mean you died?" He said, "I was inside in the hospital, and he had his operation, and the resuscitation team were in the ward. They had to resuscitate the guy that was in the bed, next bed to him, because he had died. And so they finished resuscitating him. They turned around, they looked at Bob and said, 'Oh, Jesus, he's dead too.' So they turned around, they resuscitated Bob." So I said, "Right." And I said, "How long were you dead?" And he said, "Oh, they told me I was dead for 12 or 13 minutes. I said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Did you see anything? Like, was there light or tunnel, angels?" "No, fuck all." So I said, "Right, okay." So I said to Bob, "You're probably the most highly qualified hearse driver in the world." I said, "You've actually been to the other side, you came back and you're driving the hearse again." But my granddad died as well, and something similar. She was upstairs, and she was dying, and then they thought she died, so they called the doctor. Doctor came down and said, "Yeah, she's dead." So my mum was doing up the room to get ready for the wake. About 5 hours later, she heard this, looked around, and she was breathing again. And they said, it was actually funny because they said, "Oh, Jesus," they were after contacting everybody and cousins in England and America and telling them Beattie is dead. And then 5 hours later, Beattie's not dead. So the last people to leave the pub that night, when they came down, they said Beattie's dead, everyone left. But the last people to leave were the poker players, and they were down at the end of the pub. And one of the poker players was the local postman, Joy. So they were about to go to bed, and then somebody said, "Oh, Jesus, Joy was the last man to leave. We have to catch him, because he'll be giving the town news out around the country." So they went up to the post office anyway, met Anne, the post lady, and said, "Anne, what run is Joy doing today?" "I don't know." So they were scattered anyway. They were sent out in 5 different runs that he potentially could have done. And they eventually found Joy. He was after finishing one leg of a run. I said, "Joy, Beattie isn't dead." "Oh, Jesus, top news story of the morning. I better go back." So he went back to the start and told all the houses that Beattie wasn't dead. She lasted for another 3 or 4 days. And then she died, and they had the funeral.
She was gone for 5 hours.
Oh, she was gone for they think she went into a kind of a coma. And yeah, she was gone and then came back. So, you hear these stories about scratches on coffins and things like that. It doesn't happen now because they're embalmed, and they definitely are not alive after the embalming. But people did slip into comas and were presumed dead. So as a result, I've heard stories and I've seen drawings of areas where they had a little hole and a pipe down into the ground and a string down into it with a bell, that if the person was alive, they could actually pull it. And
so, did you come across that drawing of a little bell?
Yeah. I saw it somewhere. Somebody showed it to me, where they left a pipe down into the top of the coffin, and a string down into it, and a bell at the top. I don't know, was it something to do with Glasnevin? But somewhere along the line, anyway, there was that people had an awful fear of being buried alive. But I even had one of my neighbours. I think she actually asked her doctor if she could be injected when they thought she was dead, or they were sure that she was dead, with some kind of poison to make sure that she was dead. So this was 30, 40 years ago, and I spoke with her since, and I said, "Listen, if you get embalmed, you're dead. There is no way you're going to be alive after that." So she said, "That's fine." But there's a lot of people then don't want to be buried. A lot more people are going for cremation, and they don't like the idea of going down into the 6 feet into the ground.
Does it bother you at all? Or do you have any preference yourself, even for yourself? Or?
Oh, I'm going to be burned. Yeah, I have no intention of going into any hole in the ground. I don't really like them anyway. I'm a bit claustrophobic, but no, I want to be definitely burned and scattered.
Was there a reason why the funerals were so quick years ago in Ireland? Is there any reason you were?
I don't know. I said the only reason really that they were quick was because there was no embalming or no preservatives. Like the laying out of a corpse was done with very primitive, cotton wool, and the bodies tended to go off. So I'd say that was the reason for the short wake.
And have you find that time frame expanded a little bit in recent years?
It sometimes expands, and the reason that it expands is because we have embalming now. It can expand, and in a lot of cases before, people didn't have enough time to get back from Australia, New Zealand or whatever. Whereas now, like I've held people for weeks waiting, and plus we have refrigeration as well. So like I held somebody once for 14 weeks, which is very unusual in Ireland. So that's changing. When people come into me now, they say my son is in Australia. Like, what do we do? And I said, well, we have embalming. Don't worry about it. We can hold on.
And you've seen the difference over in England and Scotland. There, it's much longer.
Oh, it's much longer. Yeah. When you're talking over there, you're talking 3 to 4 weeks. But it's always been like that. But then they've had the tradition of embalming a bit longer than we have. But like you won't have a quick funeral. Like I've often gone over and back and either collected or brought bodies over, and you're talking weeks.
Do you prefer our system?
Well, our system is what I'm used to, so it doesn't matter. Like if somebody has to wait a week or 2 weeks or whatever, I don't mind. It doesn't bother me at all.
There's a great sense of occasion, or as you mentioned earlier on, a celebration with an Irish funeral or something. It gathers up its own energy, doesn't it?
Oh yeah. Well, I was telling somebody, I was at a wedding recently, and I was sitting with a bunch of Australians, and they were on because they heard I was an Undertaker. They were asking all these questions, and I said sometimes it's such a celebration of life. I said, do you know the difference between an Irish wedding and a funeral? They were there, no. I said, one person. So that it can be a real celebration. Like I remember a funeral here years ago where a friend of mine was working behind the bar with me, and at 12 o'clock they sent him home to get his guitar, and I bailed out at 2 and met them at the church the following morning. I said, what time did you finish up? And he said, I don't know, but the birds were singing. It was about 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. So it can be a celebration of life.
There's a great comfort. You probably see it yourself in people shaking someone's hand or seeing.
I do, and to be honest, I've had people coming to me beforehand saying they dread it, but afterwards saying it was very comforting. So yeah, I do see that a lot. It does seem to help people.
How did you find COVID at all?
COVID was strange. We had to change everything during COVID, and I think the hardest part was at the start of COVID, with the sense of mystery that was there. So nobody knew what to do. We knew nothing about the illness. We didn't know much about how it spread. I think it was a bit like AIDS. When AIDS came out first, nobody knew what to do, how to react. So as a result, the reaction was probably knee-jerk but necessary, where we had to gown up and we had to take lots of precautions to get through it. But I think the hardest part was for the families. I found it really hard for some families who just couldn't go to see their next of kin, and closed coffins where they couldn't see them, and that was a difficult part. But then we had to adjust things to cope with it. So what we started to do was we printed off the condolences that were left online, and we printed them into books and had them bound, so that at least the family could see all the people's wishes or well wishes. And then another thing we did was we mounted a camera on the hearse. So what people started to do was stand along the roadside, and because they couldn't attend the churches were limited to 10, 15, 20 people, so they'd stand outside their houses. So we had a camera and we just mounted it on the front of the hearse, and we gave it back to the family so they could see everybody standing out and blessing themselves or whatever as the hearse went past. But I had a good one there actually. A family came to me and they said, "Do you film our funeral, Dad's funeral today?" I said, "I did, yeah." "When will you have it ready?" I said, "I'll have it ready for you tonight. I have a young fellow who edits for me." He said, "Right." He said, because one fella came and said, "Oh, jeez, I missed you at the funeral or whatever, but I was standing on the side of the road." And she says, "I know the fucker wasn't." So she was going to check it out. So, yeah. So, yeah, we listened with COVID, we just had to change things around. And it's probably made the, general health, especially in nursing homes, better. But, no, it was very difficult for some families. And I remember one woman coming and saying, like, her mother blamed her for putting her into the hospital, and they couldn't actually go in to see her, and she kind of was shouting out the window at her saying, "It's your fault, I'm in here and I'm dying." And I thought that was wicked hard. But yeah, as I said, there was humour in it as well. And they're looking for some fella at the side of the road who wasn't there. So
They say that you notice who's not at your funeral.
well, they said that, yeah. You'll remember the person who didn't turn up. So
Those days are behind us.
yeah, people are still fairly good to go to funerals though. Like I've
Oh, sorry, but I mean the COVID.
the COVID.
The COVID days are behind us.
Oh, thankfully, yeah. But it could happen again. There could be some new disease or outbreak or whatever. And I suppose if it does happen again, we'll be a bit more prepared for it. We know what we'll do. And to be honest, COVID didn't hit this part of the country very badly. We had a lot of things set up. There was an emergency mortuary ready to go in different places. I think there was one in Clonmel. There certainly was one in Waterford. That if we got the huge amount of bodies that they saw in New York and places like that we could have coped. And it was good because all the Undertakers in this area got together, and we had a WhatsApp group that if anyone was stuck or needed help, we were all going to help each other. So we were ready for that. But I have spoken to Undertakers up around, mainly along the East Coast and up around the border, and they got roasted because a lot of the greater population and greater population of nursing homes, they got hit badly. Like I know one fellow told me he did an extra 100 funerals that year, which was massive. He was up around Wicklow, that area. But it didn't affect this area an awful lot. I had a few COVID deaths, or I had a few that were related to COVID, but not actual COVID deaths. But yeah, we weren't too badly hit by it, thankfully.
How many funerals would you do a year, roughly?
Roughly between 30 and 50. But the number is growing, and it's growing because we have an ageing population. So, and funerals are probably getting a little bit more elaborate. Some are going to the crematoriums, and but as I said, the whole funeral scene is changing. And actually, funny, I was only thinking about it the other day. When I started off, you had two choices of coffin: standard or outsize. End of story. That was it. Now, I've got a selection of about 10 different types of coffin, from wicker, leaf made, unpolished oak, unpolished cardboard, you name it. There's a huge range of stuff available there for people. So I suppose people have a bigger choice, something that they wouldn't have had before. If you're that size, you're going in that, and if you're that size, you're going in that, and that was it. So that whole thing has changed as well.
And I know sadly, sometimes we have infant deaths, children dying.
Mm.
Did you ever come across that in your mother's records of a little family getting a little baby's coffin? Or
I don't remember, but I've done a good few myself, and generally the coffin is provided by the hospital, and most undertakers don't charge for those funerals. We just do them, and in a lot of cases they're quiet. Just the family, they could be stillborn or whatever else, and it's just the family there themselves, and the hospital provide the coffin, and we just do it quietly.
Did you ever come across in your time as well where probably in the past probably more, none of it would have been all kind of men of the road, all tramps years ago, or poor men might be found, did a bit of labour and found dead in the barn. Did you ever come across any of those in the records?
No, but I have heard my mum talking about it. And funny enough, there was one, it wasn't him, it was a man died in the street, but he was actually taken in here because of that law, the public house law, where you had to take the body in, and we used to have a bagatelle at the other side, and they actually waked him in there until he wasn't from this town. So until the Undertaker came from the other town to take him away, they waked him on the street. But there was a section of the graveyard for vagrants or impoverished people, and I've heard about them, but I've never. You see, things have changed so much now. If somebody dies or they're found dead, the first person that's going to be called now is the guard, then the doctor, then the priest, if they want, and the coroner will take over. So even something as simple as one of the changes that I've noticed is before I could get a phone call at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning to come and collect Daddy. He's dead at home. Now the first question I have to ask is, has the doctor been? Is he certified to leave the house? If not, the doctor might come and the doctor might not be happy with the circumstances, so they might call the guards. So the era of going out at kind of 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning is nearly gone, because you won't be able to get the doctor to certify, and you can't take a body from a place until the doctor has certified.
Do you ever see any funerals on Christmas Day?
I've never seen funerals on Christmas Day, but I have gone out to collect people on Christmas Day. I know I'm a businessman. Actually, a lot of people don't know this, but one of the most successful businessmen in this country was an undertaker when he was younger. And he had a pretty good business, and he had a partner in business, and when they were going, his partner said, will we keep the undertaking, because it's a pretty good business. And so he turned to him and he said, well, are you prepared to leave your Christmas dinner to go and collect a corpse? And I said, no. And if we have a horse running in the Derby, are you prepared, if you get a call, to leave the ring in the Derby and go and collect a corpse? I said, no, we're set on that. So it's John Magner, the man who started Coolmore Stud. So a lot of people aren't aware that he was an undertaker. His mum was the undertaker before him. So there was another female undertaker.
You're doing this job now, you're a young man.
I'm not that young. I'm older than you think. Sorry, I just keep an eye on the clock.
Are any of your own children interested in it?
Well, my daughter does give me a hand. My 15-year-old daughter doesn't mind. She comes with me quite a lot in the hearse, and she has no qualms about lifting a body into a coffin or onto a stretcher or going into a mortuary. Her older sister would run a mile if I even mentioned going in the hearse. Actually, it's funny because I have 4 daughters, and I have the hearsette, and there at one stage they were in different schools, so I had an awful lot of driving to do. So occasionally I'd have to pick them up, and I could have a coffin in the back. I generally wouldn't pick them up if I had a body in the back. So, but I do remember getting in one day, and I collected Susie, the girl who gives me a hand, and I was collecting Evie, my younger daughter. So she came out of the school and she took a look, and she knew what I was driving, and she's kind of there, Dad, have you someone in that? I said, no. You promise? Yeah. So she hopped in the front, and Susie was the seat in the back is actually beside the coffin or the stretcher, whatever's in there. So Susie was in the back, said nothing, and so of course Evie looks in and said, there was a coffin in there. And I said, Dad, why is there a coffin in the hearse? I said, because after I drop E home, I'm under fierce pressure for time. I'm going straight into the mortuary to collect somebody. Okay, right. So we drove home, and when we got home, Evie hopped out, went into the house, and Susie was still in the back. She said, Dad, is there someone in that coffin? Yeah, thought so. And then she didn't bother her at all, but her other sister, and the other sister would freak out. But no, Susie is happy to do it with me. But she's not going to stay in the business. She actually wants to be, oh God, what she want to be? Basically, she wants to join NASA and work with space projects. She's into physics and engineering, so I don't think she'd stay at it. But then again, I didn't think I'd stay at it either. I had no intention of staying at it.
That's the thing. Did you go off to Australia and travelling? Were you planning?
I did everything. I wanted to be a journalist when I was younger. I wanted to be a rock star. I wanted to be everything, but I did not want to be an undertaker. And I kind of drifted into it. And to be honest, it's a job I do enjoy now. But like, if you asked me when I was 18 or 19, you know, you're going to stay at it, I would touch it F off. It must be a joke. So.
A particular type of breed of an undertaker. The bar undertaker is a different breed, and I'd say he's a different kind of a character than. Or is he?
I don't know. You'd have to be up to someone else to judge that. I couldn't judge it. But like, I do a lot of other things. Like I write. I'm a pilot. I went to university. I like to keep loads of things going because they say variety is the spice of life, and I think they're right.
Listen, on that note, I have to thank you for your time.
No worries.
Thanks for telling us all those stories. Really appreciate it.
Good.